Hi, I'm John Baboian from the Guitar Department, and this is Coffee Talk. Except for me, it's Tea Talk because I don't drink coffee. But
Cheers, everybody. I'm
and
Kim
that
Perlack. I'm the chair of the
and if you
guitar
look,
department, and
I don't
welcome
know
to
if you can
Coffee
see
Talk.
that, but that's my jazz mug. It says jazz on there, and the
Oh,
Z,
I love that.
the second Z is actually the handle. That's from New Orleans, the home of
That's
jazz.
incredible. We're here with John Baboian, professor of the guitar department. John, thanks for showing us your mic or your
My
cup.
mug, my
What am I
mug.
saying? Your mug.
We need to drink more coffee, I think, Kim, to
I know.
get
I
on the right
know. I
track
think
All
we're
here.
right,
gonna have to
a
totally
sip to
start
get
that one
started.
over. Yeah, let's have a sip to get started. And so we're here with Cheryl Bailey, assistant chair of the guitar department,
Hello, everybody.
and Ian Steed, our senior coordinator.
Hey, folks.
Great. So Cheryl, what are you drinking this morning?
Well, I'm over at our 921 Boylston office, guitar office, and I have a little Nespresso hookup in here. So I'm drinking it's not as good as my home roast, but it is okay. Little espresso for my Nespresso.
It will cover you until you get back home.
That's right.
John, what's your tea of choice?
Peppermint usually.
Ooh.
And there's one that I get that's nice. That's an Ocean State Job Lot. It's by Lloyd's. I don't know if it's from London or whatever, but it's very nice. They come in those little tri packs. You know, they look like a triangle, like a
Oh, yeah.
pyramid, and
Yeah.
it tastes really good. And I'll usually have one or two a day. Sometimes during students, and
Nice.
certainly at night while I'm watching a little bit of late night TV, just to kind of like wind down.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. So the first thing we generally ask everybody is if you can think about your first days at Berklee, and you've had a few because you've been a student, you've been a teacher,
Mm.
and are there some things that stand out to you when you think about your first days at Berklee?
You know, it's interesting you would talk about my first days at Berklee because my first days at Berklee predate my college days. Back in the day, there was there was an extension program at Berklee where high school students could come and study with either teachers who were teaching part-time or with like junior or senior students in the performance program who were really good and got the chance to teach in that program. So this might be a little bit of a long story, but I'm going to tell it to you because I think it's interesting. In 1971, do the math, my friends. This is 50 years ago. My father took me to see Robert Sullivan. Do you know, Kim? You might know Robert Sullivan from New England He was the classical guitar teacher at New England Conservatory for many, many years.
I do.
Okay. He
Yes, I
took,
know that
I
name
was
for
like
sure.
14 or 15 years old, and my father took me up to see Robert Sullivan with my Gibson 335. Wait. This very
Oh,
Gibson
wow.
335 that I so that was
That's a
19,
beauty.
That is
an instrument I've had since
beautiful.
1969. And he took me up to Robert Sullivan, this great classical guitar player and educator. And me with my 335, I went up there to play some blues for him because that's what I was doing at the time. And Robert Sullivan was a very nice man and he listened to me. And after listening to me, he said, "Yeah, that was very nice. Good, good." And he says to my father, "You know, I think you really should take him over to Berklee to see Bill Levitt." And ultimately,
Wow.
that's what we did. So again, we go, same year, 1971, we go, he calls Bill Levitt. Bill invites him up, which is very great, gracious. Imagine, 15-year-old student calling you up, Kim, and saying, "Hey, can I bring my son over, my 15-year-old to play for you?" And Bill said, "Sure." And so after
That's
hours, my
really cool.
dad took me up to Bill's office,
For the
and
record, Kim would say sure too, just so you know.
I would. I would
I
also
have
say sure. I
I have
mean,
no doubt. I have no doubt. And so Bill invited us in, and I sat there and played my 335 and played some blues for him again, and he enjoyed it because I was also reading out of some of his books, and he asked me to read some music, and I read it in open position really good because I was originally a horn player before a guitar player. So I was always a reader to a certain extent. But on guitar, I was still at open position, right? And so I played this in open position for him. And someone had told me about playing a G major scale in the second position with no open strings. So I had learned that specifically to go play for him. And I did that. He says, "Oh, great. That's good. You know that scale fingering. Now let's read something in that position." And I was lost.
Right.
So that was my first experience with Bill Levitt. But he was very gracious about it and very wonderful. And he set me up with the extension program. So at 15 years old, I was coming to Berklee once a week to study with several teachers. One of them was Charlie Chapman, and one of our colleagues. At that time, he was a senior at Berklee, and just before he started to teach at the school. Another one was Tom Rotella. Tom has since gone on to LA to become one of the great studio players in LA and has done a lot of recordings. And there's a side story that's coming up for that. I got a lot of them, so we'll be talking a lot. I got nothing to say, right? And so that was my first experience at Berklee as a 15-year-old student coming to the 1140 building and taking lessons with Tom Rotella and then later Charlie Chapman. Then, 73, I came as a Berklee student and did my 4 years as a music ed major.
Wow. Did you, when you chose music ed, did you have a specific intention to teach school, or like what was behind that choice for you?
Good question. Yeah, at the time, there were only 3 majors at the school. You were either a performance major, a writing major, or an education major.
Okay.
And all of my previous teachers all said to me, "You should get your music ed degree so you got something to fall back on." I wanted to be Jimi Hendrix. And then later I wanted to be George Benson. And so that wasn't what I wanted to do. But they all said, "Get the music ed degree. You'll be happy that you have it later on because you might need it." And so I got into the music ed program. But at the time, I was also able to take as many writing courses as I could and tried to get into as many ensembles as I could. There were many less students then, so you could do things like that. So I would just go knock on a door of an ensemble that was obviously missing a guitar player, and I'd say, "Hey, can I come in and play with you?" And I would. And sometimes do that for the whole semester.
Oh, that's
And
great.
about halfway through, junior year, I started getting into my music ed stuff, and I started getting this mindset that I'm going to be Mr. Baboian, the music teacher in the high school, right? And went through the student teaching and all that stuff, and graduation's coming up, and they gave us all the information about how to try and get a job, and I started filling out a stack of applications about this high for all the surrounding towns where I lived, because that's what they said what to do. And about halfway through that, I said to myself, "Wait a minute, this isn't what I wanted to do." And I took that stack of applications and I stuck it on top of a file cabinet in my parents' house, and I believe it still sits in that same place. So I kind of changed my mind a couple of times in the process there. But ultimately, I'm glad I did the music ed major because I learned a lot about how to work with students. So it actually turned out to be a good thing. I'm glad I did that major.
That's what I was going to ask you. What are the things, if you had some things that you learned by doing that major that you've taken with you into your teaching or even into your playing and practicing?
How to work with a large class of students, sometimes very young. I actually enjoyed elementary education. Kindergarten kids will do anything for you. They'll jump out the window if you ask them to. And that was wonderful. But it also meant that when you got to the older kids, you had to learn how to interact with them to keep them interested, because they could get kind of nasty. Middle school, junior high school, yeah. And so I did discover that if I could keep 30 eighth grade students interested, I could go out on a gig and keep people interested with my music playing. So playing gigs was no big deal. If you can keep eighth graders interested, yeah, an audience that's there to see you anyway, yeah, no problem.
John, when did you start teaching in the guitar department? How did that happen?
Okay, after I graduated in 77 and took a few years to teach on my own at home and do some playing. I had a lot of gigs and did some traveling. And 1980, well, let me lead up to that. For several years in between there, while I was teaching at home, I had a bunch of students that were teaching, that were from Cambridge area, that were studying with me. One of them happened to be David Gilmour. And so these young guys, very talented guys, were studying with me regularly. And I would take them to every one of the guitar nights at Berklee. At that time, there was only one a year, and it was at the Performance Center. So I would take the 4 or 5 of them to guitar night and introduce them to Bill and say, hey, Bill, these guys are working on your books and all. They want to say thank you. And I wasn't doing that for any other reason than just to say, you know, here, these guys really appreciate your work, and I just wanted to show you. And in 1980, September or somewhere thereabouts, he called me on the phone and said, hey, John, there's an opening. Do you want it? And on the other end of the phone, I'm going, I said, yeah, Bill, that sounds fine. So that's how that started. And the intention at the time was, let me do 3 or 4 years teaching at Berklee before I go out to LA and become a studio musician. 41 years later, I'm still saying that.
I have so many questions for you, but I'm going to take a break and ask Cheryl what's on her mind right now.
Well, I was just thinking about in all these scenarios, you know, you had an intention that you had set on, and then as you headed in that direction, it bifurcated and you turned out in different places. And I always think that's probably the most common thing in all of anyone's career is, you know, you show up and you're heading somewhere, and then at some point you have that openness to realize, oh wait, this is calling me over here. So I think that's a really, I think so many careers are based on that. You know, you set out to do one thing and you go and you have that ability, you have that musicianship. Obviously, I think that's the other side of it, is you work on developing all those skills. You can apply them in many different ways.
Yeah.
You know, and then just to have the openness to go, oh wow, okay, well, you know, I was going to be a music teacher in the schools, but then this called me that way or this way. And I think that's great. I mean, as Kim is always talking about the adaptability, you know, you're developing your skills and just life in being a musician and music could call you in so many ways.
Yeah.
So, you know, the more, as you do, like you're so meticulous in all of your materials. Actually, you know, we've been working on that book, about the proficiency stuff, and I was looking through your stuff, and I mean, I was a student while you were teaching her, and I really regretted that I didn't study with you when I was reading, because your stuff is so precise, the way you express things, and so thorough. And I was looking, I was like, man, I should have hung out with that guy when I was.
Yeah, you could have taught me a few things, I think.
No, but I'm hanging out with you now, so that's what counts.
Well, you know, versatility and diversity and flexibility is one of the things I try and teach all my students, is that, you know, this is the music business, and the music business is fickle, and we have no idea where it's going to and where it's heading. You have to be prepared, and you have to be prepared for anything that might come your way, because you don't know what door is going to open. It was like last week we had that, you know, our soiree, and I gave you the quotes, and one of the quotes had to do with doors opening, where one door closes, another door opens. But you have to be prepared to be able to go through that door.
Right.
And that's why we do what we do. We train students to try and be able to do everything. Students need to be able to play chords. Students need to be able to read. Students need to be able to improvise in a number of different styles. Students need to be creative. Students need to be able to function. Students need to be on time. Just as we talked, you know, things that a professional has to understand and know, because when that door opens, and you really don't know which door it's going to be, you have to be ready to go through it.
That's right. I was thinking as you were talking about, you've come and you've taught here for 4 decades in the guitar department. And so you've seen a lot of different groups and cohorts of students come through. And at the same time, your style, I think people would say, is really distinctive. You're a versatile guitar player. And yet when we hear you, it's like, oh yeah, that's John Baboian. Or if someone said to me, could you describe kind of how he plays? I feel like I have a sound of you in my mind that you've developed. So one of the questions that I have because that's true, is how did teaching at Berklee in one way sort of help you as you were developing your own distinctive sound? And then how did that work when you're also trying to create materials to help people grow in a changing musical environment? Did you feel like there are big points of change? Like how?
Yeah, I remember vividly when everybody was coming into my lessons and saying, I would always ask students at the beginning of their first lesson, okay, who are you into? Who do you like? Who do you listen to? And I can remember when students were starting to say quite distinctly, Pat Metheny. Mm-hmm. And then I remember when students started very distinctly saying Eddie Van Halen. And I remember distinctly when they started saying Stevie Ray Vaughan. And I remember when it went to John Mayer and so forth and so on. So I can kind of see where there were always a number of guitar players that would come through and they were being influenced by new people. And you would hear those names regularly, so you knew there was something influential happening with that player. Metheny, obviously, Eddie Van Halen, obviously, they were influencing them. And maybe I'm kind of like getting off topic a little bit, but I learn as much from my students as I do, I think, teach from them, because they all play different styles. Generally, they tend to come to me because they want to, whatever style they're doing, they'd like to expand into some jazz. And my background was as a rock player and blues player first, turned jazzer. So I have that background. That's what I did. And I think they appreciate the fact that, yeah, I was at one point a jazz or rocker. I mean, rocker and blueser, and still am to a certain extent. I pull out my pedal board every couple of times a year and turn them all on at the same time and have some fun with it, Depends on the gig. If there's a gig that calls for it, it's like scream therapy. I really enjoy turning them all on and blasting and having a great sound. But it's I kind of went off topic again. I learn as much from them, and the whole jazz thing. That's what I do. That's what I'm known as. But I came from a different background, so there's that variety involved as well.
Cool. Ian, this sounds like a moment for you to jump in.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so you've been in so many different roles at Berklee, like as a student, as somebody who's a pre sort of student, you were in this extension program, and then as a longtime faculty member. I'm curious, there's a question that I always ask our guests, and that is there something that, like, you've noticed that a lot of students come in that they might be asking a certain set of questions, or they might be thinking of something in a certain way, and you can sort of notice a blind spot, that there's something that they should be aware of, that they should be asking, that they don't know to ask?
I'm not sure that they don't know what to ask, but I know that they know what they're deficient at. The number one thing, and this should be without any hesitation, is reading. They almost all come in and say, yeah, I'm not really a good reader. What can I do about that? And what can you do to help me with that? And then second, in my particular case, they say, how do I play jazz lines? How do I create jazz lines? And it's one of those things that I was hearing many, many, many times. There's a third one as well, but let me finish this first and then remind me I got a third one in my mind. it was, they were, particularly blues and rock players who were used to. And they would ask, okay, how do I turn that into a jazz line? And I'm saying, okay, first, this major scale. So instead of just playing that major scale, how about if you add one chromatic note in there? And then do a couple. And all of a sudden you start hearing more bebop-y type lines by putting those in there. And so that's something that they're not aware that it's that simple to do. And so you show them how they might do that. The third thing that frequently happens is students come in and say, I don't know how to put together a routine, a practice routine. How do I put together my practice schedule? And so that's one of those things that you kind of show them. Here's some ideas. These are topics. There's 4 big headings that I like: warm-ups, reading, chords, repertoire. That's it. I mean, if you can do those 4 headings, you got everything covered. There's a whole bunch of subheadings underneath of those, but those are the 4 things you got to work on. And so if you have 1 hour to practice on a given day, 15 minutes, 15 minutes, 15 minutes, 15 minutes. If you've got 4 hours to practice on a day, 1 hour, 1 hour, 1 hour, 1 hour. You don't have to set a stopwatch so that it's, 60 minutes, I better go on to the next thing. No, but balance in your practice routine. Yeah.
It sounds like, too, you're, even in your first story, when you first played for Bill and you played the G major scale, and then he asked you to read there, it sounds like a common thing that you've seen is the idea of making connections. Like, you have the scale pattern. Now you have to understand that when you read, you're going to use that pattern.
Yeah.
You have the blues lick, and it's not like you throw that away when you play jazz. It's now you just look at the same data in a different way. Do you feel like when you're even giving people suggestions for their practice routines, are you encouraging them to do that in a specific way?
Yeah, there's that disconnect between, you're practicing this scale in 5 different positions. Right. Okay, so now let's improvise. Wait. Let's see if I can give an obvious example. All right, we're going to practice in G major. Give me 3 G major fingerings. Okay, good. Let's improvise in G.
Okay, so for the people who are listening on the podcast, what he did was he played 3 of our scale patterns that we use in the proficiency, starting in the 2nd position, moving up the neck. And then when he went to improvise, he played the pentatonic scale that we all learned first up at the 12th fret, like completely disregarding all of the work that he had done on the majority of the guitar neck with the new patterns that like a student would be learning at Berklee.
Yeah. That disconnect is very important to try and connect. Yeah.
How do you help them?
Well, I was just going to say about that. I think that's always that fear of the getting out of their comfort zone. You know what I mean? Like they know that, and that's safe. And I always think what you're great at is encouraging students to explore that new area, because you're not going to sound good at it right away.
Yeah.
You're probably going to stumble and quote unquote make tons of mistakes. So that's scary. That's like a vulnerable place. But you're really great at that, of just being encouraging and saying, you know what? Yeah, try it down there. I think that's what is your strength as a teacher, is like letting students stumble and it's okay. You're not going to be Joe Pass your first time you use that new fingering.
Right. You gotta be able to step into the water before you can start trying to swim. And if you're practicing that G major scale, you're not practicing it just to pass the proficiency. And some people think that's its only purpose. No, it's to master the neck of the guitar and have that material available to you.
Yeah. Do you help people with strategy often? Do they need like those steps from you? And how do you approach that? Like if you have someone who is afraid to start to improvise with like the new patterns that they're
you have to feel out the student, I think, because every student is different. And some you know who you can kind of force to say, no, I want you to use that stinking pattern, will you? And then there's those you say, it's you have to treat a little bit more gingerly because you don't want them to lose their love of what they're doing. And that's what you have to be careful. I mean, why do we all do this? We all do this because we love playing the guitar and making music. And if you take that love away from them, that's kind of bad. So we have to try and balance that, how to keep them loving their instrument, but saying, this is going to make you even better.
Is that something you've found over the years, like this kind of idea of having the proficiencies? And the idea of it, I think always, even when the materials were different, the idea is like, these are the building blocks for everything that you do, regardless of style, really dependent. It's an application process into authenticity of style. And what you said, I think we've all heard so many times where people are like, oh yeah, I can play those for the test. Without that sense that then when you go to ensemble or then when you go to your repertoire, that's what it's made of. And I think we're all working on kind of connecting those dots.
Right.
Have you had a few moments that you think you can think of where that really worked in a powerful way? Or
Yeah, I think early on, and in my case, early on could have been anywhere between now and the last 40 years. Somewhere along the line, I started teaching the modes, particularly the major scale modes in first semester, and saying, if you're going to work on the Dorian mode based on this fingering, and here's where it comes from and how this pattern is, here's a song that utilizes the Dorian mode very big time. Obvious answer to that is "So What" by Miles Davis. A more useful, I don't want to say useful, more different, just because you don't always do "So What," is "Little Sunflower" by Freddie Hubbard, which is also very Dorian oriented. Or Herbie Hancock, "Cantaloupe Island," which apparently they're all doing now as part of that M class, whatever it is they do in first semester.
oh, okay.
Yeah, and I didn't know that until I started pulling that out for a student. Say, oh yeah, I did this in M class, and I said, oh, good, okay. So you know the song a little bit. Have you played it on the guitar? No. Well, good. Let's play it. And so what you do is find a song that represents what they're studying as a theoretical concept, and now you're saying, here's how this works and why you learned it. You didn't learn it just to pass the proficiency. It happens in songs.
Yeah. It's funny. I think the guitar is like that. You can go a long time playing different things and not realize that they're the same. I feel like even now I have moments like that.
Yeah.
That really come up,
Hey, I got to tell you one more. I was going to tell you a
ahead.
story about the versatility, the variety thing. This is one that it's kind of a fact and fiction at the same time. This actually happened to me to a certain point. I usually tell students that you want to be prepared for any eventuality because you never know when you're going to get a call like this. I got a call about 25 years ago from somebody who is saying, I've got a gig for you at a Swiss ski chalet for 3 weeks and $1,500 a week, all expenses, hotel, the works. And it was a great gig. And I couldn't do it because it was at the start of Berklee teaching. And so I couldn't take the gig. So that's what part of the story. That's the facts part of the story. The fiction part of the story, I go on and I say, hey, yeah, you got this great 3 weeks. You got to play at a Swiss ski chalet, $1,500 a week, all expenses, and it's a great gig. But you got to play the banjo. And the point of that being that if you want that gig, you better know how to play the banjo, or at least have one in your corner so that you can grab it and really quickly, oh yeah, okay, I can do this, yes. And I have 3 of them, by the way. Don't tell John Wheatley or Dave Hollander, but yeah, I've got 3 of them. 2 of them are 5-string banjos. One was my grandfather's banjo from about 100 years ago. The other one was a gift from a family who had no need for it, so they said, yes, you take it. And then the other one is a 6-string Dean banjo that I realized that I'm never going to play the 5-string banjo. So I found this 6-string banjo online that tunes like a guitar. So yeah, I can play a 6-string banjo.
That's amazing. Yeah.
So I could have taken the gig.
You could have taken the gig. That is so true, because I think a lot of times, especially if something's hard or challenging or unfamiliar, students will tell themselves, well, it doesn't matter because I don't need to know how to do that. I do this. And then in reality, you're right. You may be called on to do many things that you're not expecting.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting to me because I think one of the cool things about Berklee is that you can make a lot of choices as a student. But that also means that you have to choose to go where it's hard to go sometimes. You don't have like a set grid that says, sorry, you have to take an improvisation class with John Baboian, or you have to take a sight reading class with Mark White. So you have to put yourself by choice in a position to learn something that's hard or unfamiliar to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have you seen students like either run at a problem like that in a way that impressed you, or have you seen people sort of avoid it and then maybe finally come around to it?
Yeah, both sides, because it depends on the student. That clearly you would want to try and get as much down as you possibly can while you're at school, because when you get out in the real world, oddly enough, you won't have as much time as you think to practice and put it all to you, to try to put it to use then. So this is your time to try and work it out and figure out what I need to know, or at least get the basics and understanding of what you are at some point going to need to do, so that when the opportunity arises, you might be able to do it. Too many windows out there. It's interesting. This is I was thinking about this the other day. As boy, I don't want to get political here, and I won't. But I just have to hint at it a little bit. Recently, Joe Biden stopped the pipeline, and there's about 1,000 people going to be losing their job as a result. And I understand that that's not a good thing, but they have to be prepared to change jobs when things change, as we have to do that as the music changes. And I remember vividly about 25 years ago playing a gig with a bunch of good, very good older musicians. It was a big band gig. It was a society gig. It was probably for some rich kid's birthday party. I don't know what it was. I don't remember. But it was like we had a 20-piece orchestra. And I do recall during one of the breaks, the trumpet players were all standing in a circle, kind of looking at each other and saying, where did all the gigs go? And I thought about this for a second, and I said, man, I'm working like 12, 15 gigs a month. What do you mean, where did the gigs go? And it occurred to me that what happened was the music had changed, and they didn't. And as a result, they were left behind. As a guitar player, we have to be prepared to be able to play anything from 1920s music to 2021 music. And the music is not going to go backwards. Yeah, at times it will, but for the most part, music is moving forward. Technology is moving forward. And you can either be prepared to be able to move forward with it, or you can prepare yourself to be left behind as the music moves and you don't. And for these trumpet players at that time, who were very good musicians, they, not through their own choice, were left behind. Right. Now, if you choose, like at this point in my career, I choose not to play certain kinds of music. Because I've been doing what I do for a long time now, and I can stay where I am, and I'm kind of happy accompanying singers and playing standards and enjoying playing solo guitar music at restaurants, and when really occasionally nice really gig comes up, beautiful, wonderful. But if it goes no further than that for me right now, I'm satisfied. But if I'm younger, I would have to think to myself, I've got to look ahead and say, okay, where is this music going to be heading? And how am I going to stay up with it as that changes? The Dorian mode is not going to change.
Right.
But how it's applied probably will.
So that was my question. Like, if you could make, say recommendations for choice for students, like what are things that are constants that you feel like you have to study this, you have to make this choice, in my opinion? And then what are the things that the types of skills they develop to allow them to adapt maybe to something that they can't even see is going to be? What are your recommendations?
Well, the basic elements of the instrument and the music are going to be constant. The Dorian mode is going to be the Dorian mode.
Right.
Scales, modes, arpeggios, the function of the instrument, how it works, the mechanics of the instrument. I like to talk about this machine. Oh, we have coffee talk. Wait, I got an analogy here with the coffee talk. This is good. This is a machine. We have to learn how to make the machine work. If you go to Starbucks and you ask them for a cappuccino, and the person behind the counter doesn't know how to work the cappuccino machine, you're not going to get a good cup of cappuccino. If you don't know how to make this machine work, you're not going to get good music out of it. So one of the constants is you have to learn how to work the machine. That means learning fingerings, learning scales, learning arpeggios, learning chord forms, and how they function harmonically. The things that will change, and you have to be prepared for, is that, and it depends on how you perceive where you see your career going, of course. If the music changes, I've got to be ready to adjust to that as well. The technology involved with all of this is not going to go backwards. We're not going to go back to cassette players anytime soon. It's only going to move forward, and you have to be prepared to move forward with that too.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Cheryl, what are you thinking about as we're talking?
I think everything that you're saying, John, is really wise. This is wisdom that you're laying out here, and factual stuff, like really what you're saying there, and really even from the beginning when we were talking about that adaptability, it's based on those skills. Yeah, you're right. The major scale is the foundation of Western music, and it has been, and it will continue to be. But you might be playing it through whatever. And, now all this stuff with doing home concerts, remote concerts. People were doing that for a while, but now it's just front and center. But still, you're going to have to prepare some repertoire. You're going to have to, be able to play at this level, whatever. You want people to tune into the next time.
Yeah.
Here's my real, So I think this is really important for everything that we do, here in a college environment in terms of about music. It's about the music and the skills and developing that, because that is going to be your calling card to success in whatever form that takes. So it's great to hear it from you, and you've put it so succinctly and straight ahead. It's really great to hear that.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about this all the time, when we're talking about curriculum, and I always feel as though if people can focus on playing their instrument and understanding how the guitar works, and then understanding how your hands work to make your sound, you can't go wrong with depth. I feel like sometimes people are wanting to say, oh, look, pop music, it's a lot simpler than some of these other styles of music. So you don't really need to know a whole lot about your instrument. And, as long as it sounds pretty good, you can tweak your tone later with the electronics. You can throw it into Logic or Pro Tools. And that has never sounded right to me. I cannot imagine that you can't go further if you don't know your instrument better. If you're going to be a poet, no one would say you don't have to learn a lot of words.
Yeah.
And you don't need to know how to write words if you just want to say them. And I had a little stint of my life as a producer, and it never sounded good when you spliced up the records. It only sounded great. There were a lot of times, like we were a coveted studio. I was at Fred Plout Studios at Yale. Fred had founded the studio, and my boss was his first assistant, and who was still there after 45 years. And he would just turn people away. We would stop sessions often and say, why don't you come back when you can really play this like a concert?
Oh, yes.
You know, we wouldn't keep going. If it looked like, you know, I'd be mapping the score to see where we would splice. And he would look at my first two maps and say, okay, we're cutting it off. We're cutting them
Yeah,
off.
yeah,
And it was always better when it was a performance, when it was really deep and beautiful. And, you know, we could just get the sound of the room and do a few things to it, you know?
right.
So I, I think it's important what you're saying. And I just wanted to underscore that even if technology moves forward, even if music goes through these ebbs and flows of complexity and simplicity, the depth that you have to have as an instrumental musician, as a guitar player, never changes. You always have to go as deep as you can go.
Right, right. You know, it's interesting that you bring that up. But thinking about from a studio perspective, you also have to be aware of the financial perspective of this.
Mhm.
And the more cut and paste that you have to do of stuff, the longer you're going to be in the studio, the more costly it is for you and for the producer if you're working for a producer. And producers who are putting up the money for something, they're not happy when it starts costing more money. The quicker you're able to do something the first or second time, the less money you are costing them, and they like you more.
Yeah, and that goes back to what you're saying about reading.
Mm-hmm.
If you can read down that part and it doesn't sound like you're reading notes for the first time in your life, you know, you're reading, it's a performance, right?
Yeah.
You've got to be
One
able
of
to
the,
do
one of the
that.
things that I do quite a bit of, not as much anymore, but did quite a bit of, was work a lot with, let's call them Vegas headliners that
Mhm.
travel around. And so if you're part of the local musicians union and you're kind of have a reasonable reputation, you get called to play gigs like that where somebody's coming to town for an evening and you're hired to do the gig. And what you do is the rehearsal in the afternoon for 2 or 3 hours, and then the concert at night for 2 hours, whatever it is. You know, one example that can come to mind for me was okay. Well, let me backtrack a little bit. I for 2 years I worked with Ben Vereen traveling.
Mhm.
Great singer, actor, dancer. And a lot of times it would be a case of the office would call and say, hey, March 15th, can you be in Chicago? Great, good, I'll be there. May 25th, we're going to be in Naples, Florida. Can you be? Yeah. And so for 2 years, I was doing that with him. But in that type of situation, I had worked a little bit with them regularly, so I knew their stuff. But a person like that coming to town, hiring the local musicians, let's say it's Tom Jones. I had to do one with Tom Jones once. You get an afternoon rehearsal, oftentimes with just the music director, not even necessarily with the star. And they don't do all the charts. They'll run the beginnings and the middles. And if the band is good enough, they say, good, these are good musicians. We don't have to do the rest of the chart, which means you don't even get to practice the whole chart. And then you get a break and the gig starts at 7 o'clock. You go put your tuxedo on, you go out and you play behind Tom Jones for an hour and a half.
Mhm.
Now, if you can't read that chart the first time, you're not going to get called back to do that gig
That's right.
because you're going to cost them time, money, and they're not going to be very happy.
Right.
Now, that's not a gig everybody can do, and there's a certain amount of knowing the right people and somebody giving you a chance on all to get that to happen. You know, in the music business, sometimes being in the right place at the right time, knowing the right people, and getting lucky. Those are those things you've heard for generations still hold true. And that's how that happened for me too. But it was, you know, if I had not been able to read the parts right away, there's no way they would have kept me on that gig.
Mm. Right.
And I want to make one note to refer to Joe Stump's interview. The fact that you played with Tom Jones would have, if as a teenager, Joe Stump revealed that his big influence for his accessorizing of silver was due to Tom Jones. So
Really?
I'm sure you've just gone up that much further in Joe Stump's
That's so true. Wait till
esteem.
we're back on campus. He's going to be so excited.
Oh, that's funny.
With the
Yeah.
scarves too. It was the rings and the scarves, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
That's funny. Joe and I have another connection too. Joe's a big Yankees fan, and I'm a big Red Sox fan.
Hmm.
And so we're always at it about the Yankees and the Red Sox. Have been for like 10, 20, yeah, probably 10, 20 years. And outside of my office is the water cooler on the fifth floor. So everybody always comes over to visit with me because the water cooler's there. And Joe comes over every once in a while. So we're always talking Red Sox, Yankees. Yeah.
That's great. Ian, how does what John has been talking about strike you as a person who's, newer out of school and playing now, working on things?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, generally like, people come to Berklee and they tend to think of it like, a lot of folks anyway, sort of conceive of it like a jazz school, or think of it as like, in an audition I have to play jazz or something. And the truth is that we actually are one of the only schools where you can play any kind of music, right?
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to hear you say that you started out, wanting to be Jimi Hendrix, right?
Mhm.
And to hear about like you dealing with students of all these different styles of music. And I'm just curious about how these things have changed or evolved throughout the guitar department, um, with you, both as a student and then as a teacher for so long. Like, how have you sort of seen that progression? And how early on was it where it was really such a diverse school? Like, has it always been this way, or
That's a
has it
good
grown?
question. No, it's grown. Yeah, it's expanded its horizons over the generations. Early on, it was a jazz school because that's what the popular music was at one point.
Mhm.
If you go look at movies and television shows from the 1950s, popular music that you'd hear on the radio was jazz-oriented music. And so that's what they were teaching. When I was a student in the 70s, I think it started expanding a little bit because I know that I was a jazzer or a rocker wanting to be a jazzer, but there were a lot of other musicians around that were rockers that still wanted to be rockers. And so they recognized that Berklee was that type of place where you could expand that. And in the guitar department, we were still a little bit tight. Bill's influence, Bill was a wonderful educator, exceptional educator, and great guitar player, and was so organized that turned the guitar department into the great department it has become. He was really responsible for all of this. But there was also times when, Bill would say, well, you're going to use that finger? I think you should use the other fingering. And he was kind of a stickler about that. And that was great. And I was following that. And then, at some point you'd see students playing a different fingering and you say, well, that's not the fingering Bill would. Yeah, it actually works. Yeah, okay, I'll go with that. Sure, why not? And you start expanding your own horizons as you realize that you don't have to be quite so narrow. And so I'd say it's in the past 30 years or so that it's expanded the horizons a little bit. Definitely by the fact that we have so many versatile teachers in the department, that helps. Clearly somebody who's studying with me and somebody who's studying with Joe Stump are not looking for the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. John, when you were talking about your gig experience, you made a mention of the union, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And over time, I mean, could you talk a little bit about like what role being in the musicians union plays in your professional life, and kind of how you see that working or not working for students
Yeah.
coming out of school now?
That's an interesting question because the union's role has kind of changed over the generations. There was a time when you just were a union musician. If you were going to work as a musician, you had to join the union. Otherwise, you weren't going to get gigs. That has changed over time. It depends on the kind of gigs you're looking for. If you want to be an orchestral musician, if you want to be a Broadway show pit orchestra musician, if you want to play a lot of these society gigs that pay really good money, you kind of have to be in the union.
Okay.
for example, a couple of years ago, I got a call to cover with the Boston Pops for West Side Story. They were going to do West Side Story in concert.
Oh, cool.
And John Finn wasn't available. He was doing a show, and Scotty was doing a show. So Scotty recommended me, and they called me. I said, "Yeah, I'm available," and it's my favorite show too. So we did like 2 rehearsals, 3 performances at Symphony Hall, and without the union, that's none of those musicians on the stage would be working without the union. That's
Right.
part of what happens with that. If you're going to do any Broadway pit orchestras, and when I say Broadway pit orchestras, that's not limited to just Broadway. There's those shows in every major city in the world. That's union work.
Okay.
Where union is not involved now that it used to be is now like the club dates, as they call it in New York, or GB gigs, so much where you're playing functions and things like that. Yeah.
Okay.
It's kind of a touchy subject because I've been a union member for a long time, and I believe in the musicians union. They've had a hard time adjusting to the music changing as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like a lot of the changes that affect us all professionally have been pretty rapid. Is that accurate, or is that just how I feel about it?
I guess it depends on your time period, where the older you get, your years become a smaller percentage of your life, and things start moving quicker, and they feel like they're moving quicker.
Oh no, I know. I think I know what that means then.
No, it's like when somebody explained it to me once a long time ago, and it made sense. I said, when you're 4 years old, 1 year is 25% of your life.
That's true.
But when you're 100 years old, 1 year is 1% of your life, and so. Oh boy, forget it. Now we're getting dire.
I don't know. I'm getting old. I just had the
Oh,
realization that I'm getting old. No, that's good. I mean, do you feel all of these changes, though, you still see opportunities for students to work
yeah.
professionally?
Yeah, music, the entertainment industry isn't going anyplace. People like to be entertained. And with the internet now, there's even more opportunities. You just have to know how to find them and experience them. Monetization of it has changed dramatically. We understand that. I think everybody's aware of that. The younger students probably don't understand the way we used to get paid, and now how they understand how the new system is, but that has changed dramatically. And for those of us that were used to, like, okay, we're going to make a bunch of CDs and sell them at gigs, and when we run out of the first 1,000, we'll print another 1,000 and sell those. I've got a bunch of boxes up in my attic here.
I've got some boxes as well. Yeah.
So the monetization of the music has changed. That's up for them to have to figure out. I'm not going to be able to help them with that so much. But they're going to have to figure that out. But the music isn't going anywhere. It's going to be there. It's going to be in movies. It's going to be on radio. It's going to be on television. It's going to be in commercials. They just have to figure out how to get involved with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one of the things, like Cheryl had brought up the word adaptation before, and we're seeing that obviously right now, because for a lot of the young students who are making decisions about, do I take a semester off in the pandemic? Do I come back? Do I come back remotely? Do I come back in person? It might be the first major time in their music life where they've had to make a huge change. Instead of thinking like, yeah, it's a big change to come to Berklee, but then like you feel like, okay, once I'm in, I'm kind of on this track. But now they've had to make these big changes and maybe find some opportunities in there. And I think one of the nice things for us has been to see people try it, like come remotely, and then be so happily surprised that they found something they didn't expect to find. As they think, oh, this is going to be a setback, but actually it's an opportunity.
Yeah.
And it sounds like what you're saying is like, you're going to have to do that anyway in your life. So you might as well start now.
Yeah, of course. of course. I mean, the big thing that happened for me with this pandemic was learning how to use recording software and a microphone that I had started about 15 years ago. I was going to try and do it with Pro Tools, and then realized that, it's probably better if I just let the engineer take care of business and I'll just go play in their studio. And then this pandemic happened, and this is my studio now. And I have this nice mic that was in my basement that I grabbed, an Audio Technica mic that from 15 years ago, and the software GarageBand and Logic, and all of a sudden I started recording myself for tracks for my students and for my classes, and I started learning how to do what I never would have done had it not been for this circumstance. So adaptability, flexibility, being able to, say, hey, okay, we got to figure out how we're going to do this. What am I going to do? Well, I could sit down and watch TV and say, nah, not going to be able to do it. Or you can dig in and try it.
Right. Right.
Again, the swimming analogy. If you don't jump into the water, you're not going to learn how to swim.
Right. What are you working on now musically? Have you been inspired to practice some different things, or what are you playing?
Mostly it's been recording a lot of the Bebop Guitars arrangements that I've done over the years into recording software now. I have the music that we recorded way back when by all of the guys that were in the band, but those are on stereo tracks. I don't have the separate tracks for those, because those were a long time ago. So what I'm doing now is recording each of the individual parts into GarageBand in my case, and using those with the Bebop Guitars ensemble that I've got, and also using it with my vocal accompaniment lab and the jazz styles lab, because I'm having students now take my tracks and replacing their tracks in place of mine. So they have to play, so they're not playing live, but they're playing to me anyway. That's what I'm doing mostly now.
Can you talk a little bit about the Bebop Guitars, the ensemble, the group? Because I don't know if people listening know what the group is, but it's a bunch of really long-time Berklee faculty were in this group with you. And so I've always thought that must be really interesting to be the band leader of a group of friends and colleagues, and sort of herd all those cats, because when I'm thinking of them, I'm literally thinking of all these really strong, amazing personalities.
Yeah.
And I have this image of you with your glasses on down at the edge of your nose, like, okay, cats, let's get it together. Like, I watched you lead one rehearsal with them, and I just thought, that's incredible and everybody stopped. Everybody was like, oh, he's got his glasses down. You can't mess with him. But how did you do that? Like, you put together a group of your friends and colleagues who are so different to play this music that you all are experts in, and then you have to direct them.
Yeah, isn't that fun, huh?
And you've done it for decades. I just want to point out, right, that this group started in the 80s, right?
Yes. Yeah. I think 1990 was when I started, or might have been late 80s at that point. But yeah, it's interesting. Personalities, everybody has a different personality, and anytime anyone has worked with any group of musicians, this is what you have to deal with. There's no way that 7 people are all going to have the same personality. So you have to react and deal with it. I mean, you have to do this on a daily basis with the 60 faculty that we have. We're all different. And it's the same thing. The band started, I had the idea after, I enjoyed Super Sax, the band that was made up of 5 LA saxophone people, piano, bass, drums, and they took Charlie Parker transcriptions and harmonized, this is insane, the Charlie Parker transcriptions for 5 saxophone parts, and they would play harmonized Charlie Parker transcriptions at the real tempo, which is insanity. But they did it. Go listen to Super Sax. They're really amazing. And one of the leader of Super Sax, Med Flory, was actually an actor. He's in movies that from the 1960s. If you go and look up his name, you'll find out he was in some Jerry Lewis movies, and you'll see his face. And that's Med Flory. He's the head of Super Sax. Okay. So I decided I'd like to grab some Super Sax charts and turn them into guitar charts. So I went to see Joe Viola, who was the head of the woodwind department. Wonderful guy. He was Bill Levitt of the woodwind department, Joe Viola. And I told him what I was looking for, and he went into his file cabinet and pulled out about 10 charts from Super Sax and gave them to me. And I said, wow, this is wonderful. I'll make copies and bring them back. He says, no, those are copies. You can have them.
Wow.
So I took those, and they were written for saxophone, of course, alto, alto, tenor, tenor, baritone. I took them and had to transpose them out so that they would fit the guitar. So we started, and when I brought that back to my office, John Marasco's office was right around the corner from me. So during our mutual break, I said, John, come here, we got to try this. And so I took the alto sax 1 part, and he took the alto sax 2 part, and we started trying him, and said, yeah, this can work. And that's how it started. And so I started transposing the parts and said, who would I like to get to do this? And Larry was in my mind, and Garrison, I've done that before too. Al DeFino, who just recently passed away, and of course John Marasco and Garrison are both gone. Me, Garrison, John Marasco, Larry, Al. Oh, I'm screwed now. Because there were 6. Al was 6. There's a 6th, and I can't remember.
Oh no.
It'll come to me.
It'll come to you.
And, yeah. And so we started by doing the Super Sax charts and trying to play some of them. And, John Wilkins.
That's what I was going to guess, John Wilkins or John Damon. Yeah.
Oh, man. And then I started writing my own arrangements so that we wouldn't just be the Super Sax band playing on guitars. And so now I've got about 50 arrangements that I've put together. Some of them original compositions, some of them are arrangements of standard tunes. And about 20 years ago or so, Larry and Rick asked if I would start the student group of the Bebop Guitars. And so I did that, and so it continues.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Cheryl, what's on your mind as we kind of wind down our coffee?
I don't know. This was a really great conversation, I have to say. I am really inspired by it. Just you talking about your foundations of your teaching philosophy, and again, back to this thing about developing that core of musicianship, and really that's what it's about, and it can move in any direction, and probably will in your career. So yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed having time to share some of these thoughts and really listen to where you're coming from.
Yeah, cool. I got two more stories to tell. Like I got nothing else to say.
No, it's great. Keep going.
We talked early on when I was a Berklee extension student, and one of the students that I was studying with was Tom Rotella, who went on to become a great LA studio musician. So this is going to come around. I'm going to go around the sides, but it'll come to the center again. About 10 years ago, I got a call from the Musicians Union that there was a need for a guitar player for a movie that was going to be filmed in Boston. Great, I'll do it. I actually had a gig that was in Washington that was going to overlap with this. It was a wedding in Washington, D.C. that I was supposed to be at. And I'm looking at this and I said, wow, I got a chance to make a movie, but the gig's in how am I going to do that? So I was able to arrange a flight So the band all drove down in vans, and I was able to arrange a flight. And because the filming of the movie kept moving back, I had to keep calling JetBlue and move my flight back. So it cost me some money to do this, but it was worth it because the movie was Ted with Seth MacFarlane. And Ted 1, the good one. And so in Ted 1, about halfway through the film, there's a scene where they're at a house party, and the camera comes right to the band and starts with the band, and it comes right to me and stays with me for a while as it moves forward. It's not very long, but it's very obvious. And this was around 2011, 2012. And when the movie came out, students were stopping me on the street. I had no idea who they were, but they saw me and they said, "We just saw you, and we just saw you." And I became a momentary star, my 15 minutes of fame from that. Now, the way that the movie was made, the music had already been pre-recorded, and we were essentially lip syncing in the movie as the scene was going on. So it occurred to me that somebody is playing the music behind this that I am mimicking. And I did some research, and it turns out that the guitar player on the original tracks that I was mimicking was my old teacher, Tom Rotella. Now, how is that for coming full circle, right? I was a 15-year-old student studying with him at Berklee. Here I am in the movie mimicking him playing the guitar part in an LA studio.
That's awesome.
Weird.
I bet he loved that too.
It was a great story. We enjoyed it. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's
That one,
great.
and one more, and this one's very important for students. You never know where your next break is going to come from, and it's best to be prepared. And I like to say, don't turn down a gig. You don't know what's going to happen. Let me pull this up, and I know part of this is video and part of it is oral, but I want to bring this up.
Yeah, we can describe it. We'll just describe what you're showing.
This is my Martin Archtop guitar.
Oh, beautiful.
They made a small amount of these as a 2-inch model and as a 3-inch model in like 2005 to 2010. And around 2005, I got a call to play a gig out in the central part of Massachusetts. It was about an hour's drive away, and it was with a bunch of older music education people, let's say. So they were good musicians, not great musicians, nice people. So I didn't mind, but I'm thinking to myself, let's see, it's a Wednesday night in the summer. The gig paid like $50, I think. I said, do I really want to drive out an hour on a Wednesday night, and I'm going to have to wear tuxedo pants and a white shirt for an outdoor concert, and the music's going to be okay. Well, my family was away, and I was just going to sit home and watch TV. I said, yeah, what the heck? I'll take the gig. I go there, and the New England rep for Martin Guitars is there. And he looks at me and says, oh, yeah, I know. Yeah, Berklee faculty, I know you. Sure. Hey, we're making these new jazz guitars, and we're looking for somebody to be the clinician demonstrator for us. Are you interested? Sure. So long story short, I ended up doing a lot of traveling for Martin. I was doing clinics for them, getting paid for doing them. And I ended up with this guitar. They stopped making them around 2010. And at the time it was, keep it. What are you going to, we don't need them anymore. So this is my primary jazz guitar now. And it came from Martin. The moral of the story: don't turn down a stinky gig. You don't know who's going to be there and what it might turn into.
That's right. I mean, I think
if I had stayed home that night, wouldn't have happened.
there's so many themes. Thinking about what you're talking about, what Cheryl was talking about. If there are people who are practicers or students of any age listening to this, I think hearing you say to have a comprehensive knowledge of your instrument and to work on things and to go as deep as you can, to be adaptable, to take some chances, but be prepared when you do that.
Yeah.
And that all comes to fruition in so many parts of your career, in your teaching career, in your playing career, whether it's gigging or playing concerts or getting stuff together for your classes. You can see it all in there. I almost feel like I would be remiss if I didn't also say for the record on this podcast that you do this amazing thing that people talk about all the time where you can sing and play. And I think so many people think like, oh, well, maybe I'll sing just to get my ear together, which is maybe why you started singing everything that you play. But now that's a vocal part of your performance that you can do.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's that. Um, I don't remember how I developed that. Obviously, I heard George Benson do it to a certain extent. I remember going back and after the fact realizing that I remember Jimi Hendrix on the Band of Gypsies album actually doing it, not in the same way, but he was singing and playing his melodies simultaneously. I said, wow, I didn't realize that. And I think it just kind of like, it was an automatic thing. I sing to a certain extent. Some people would say no, he doesn't, but that's another story. But I do, I can do that, and I do it kind of naturally. I don't think about it too much. I think that's because the music comes from up in your head, and the guitar is a vehicle to get the music out of, and your voice is a vehicle to get the music out of. And if you can do it simultaneously, it's the music coming from your mind, and the vehicle itself is not necessarily the issue.
I like all of this because it also, the one thing I didn't say that I think is the key as well is you have an ability to be creative and go where the creativity in the moment needs you to go, but you're also very organized and very detailed. Cheryl was talking about your materials that you make for the students, and it seems that way when you're practicing too. Like things seem natural or things throw you for a curve, and then you find a way to work on them that's targeted.
Yeah.
So that you can keep getting better. And I think that those are the kinds of like dichotomies that are hard for people. I want to be creative and I want to go with the flow, but that also means I have to be organized and disciplined and intentional.
Yeah. I think that's because I'm lazy. I'm inherently lazy.
I don't think that's true.
Well, I think it is, yeah. And the organization helps me not to be lazy.
I can identify with that exactly. I feel the same way. I totally get that. I totally get it. It sounds like they're opposites, but it's totally true.
Yeah, I think they're connected. Yeah, if you're aware of it,
that's right.
The organization helps you to kind of fight it. Yeah.
See, there's hope. That's good. That's a hopeful statement then for all of us. Ian, what's on your mind here at the end?
Not a whole lot. I mean, this is just, it's fascinating. This has gone a lot of places. And I think it's a lot of stuff that the students can take with them, both about like the opportunities that they can take, but also like the nuts and bolts and practicing,
Cool.
and being more organized.
John, do you have any advice for us, for the three of us, as we're kind of looking at the guitar department moving forward?
Wow, keep the versatility happening. Really, that's, if I were a guitar student wanting to come someplace now, this was definitely the place I would want to be because of all the things I can, I can study with Joe Stump to do some metal stuff. I could study with Dave Tronzo to do some of that interesting slide stuff. I can study with David Gilmore, who was one of my students as a student, and he could teach me all that odd meter stuff that he's doing. He can, it's that variety and versatility is really great.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for
Hey, wait, I got one more last
being
thing.
there. Oh, good.
Promise,
I was
last
hoping.
one, last
I was hoping. Good. Because I still have a little coffee left, so I'm glad you.
Good. So going back to Ben Vereen again. So the traveling with Ben Vereen for 2 years. The first gig that I did with him, it was a case where his music director pianist knew me, and they needed somebody to start playing that gig. And so he called me and said, this is a good gig I think you would be really good for. Can you do this gig in New Jersey in July, whatever it was? And I said, yeah, sure, great. This would be great to play with Ben Vereen. I love his music and all. And so we get to the place, and it's in central New Jersey. It's a performing arts center. It's an amphitheater that holds about 10,000 people. I don't know the exact name of the place. Students from New Jersey probably know what it is. And we have a morning rehearsal for an afternoon show. It's a Saturday afternoon show. And I get there and set up and meet Ben, and we talk about it's a quartet. His band is not like a large ensemble. It's a quartet: piano, guitar, bass, and drums. All good musicians. And he says to me, in the middle of the show, I want to do a song just with you and me, because I do that with each of the musicians. It turns out that in the middle of the show, he goes to each of the musicians and does a duo with each of them. The drummer, the bass player, and the piano player and the guitar player. And so we go over a couple of tunes and decide, what's it going to be. We're sitting in the back in the green room, and we decide to go with Somewhere Over the Rainbow. And so now we have to figure out a key. And we're trying a couple of different keys, and ultimately we decide to go with, I think it was either B flat or C. And he was sitting down as he was singing this, and what you realize about singers is if you're singing sitting down versus standing up, it's different. And you come up with different keys. I know I've done this for myself as I'm practicing for a gig, and I got to play, Van Morrison, Brown Eyed Girl. And I say, oh yeah, good, that'll work in the key of E. And then I get on the gig and it's too low. No, it's because I was sitting down. I should have done it in the key of G instead. So that's what happened with Ben. And the piano player knew his key. And so we get out on the stage, and he comes over to me, and I've worked this whole thing out in the key of C that I'm going to do to work with Ben Vereen in front of 7,000 people. And the piano player goes to me like this, which, for musicians' parlance, I'm holding up three fingers for if you're only listening right now, which means E flat. And so here I've worked this whole thing out in the key of C. I'm ready to do this in front of 7,000 people on my very first gig with Ben Vereen. And all of a sudden, I'm thinking, wait, he's telling me I got to do this in E flat. So immediately in my mind, I'm saying, this moment is what the whole past 40 years has been leading you to. This is why you've practiced all this time. This is why you've been preparing yourself for this very moment. I nailed it. and I ended up playing 2 years with them. So that, it was a little bit daunting. Here you got thousands of people, and you're playing solo guitar with Ben Vereen, and you're in the wrong key, and you have to adjust immediately. So anyway, that was an interesting part. I just thought that would be something.
That's amazing. Luck favors the prepared. That's what my teacher used to say.
Yeah. Preparation, right.
I love that. That's great. That's such a great thing, I think, for people to hear also in the beginning of the semester, when you're about to start hitting the fourth week of the semester where everybody starts to get overwhelmed. And literally in your mind, you say, why am I doing this? And then you can remember that story.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for being here, John.
Hey, great. Thanks for having me.
And coffee cheers, everybody listening. Thank you, Ian. And thank you, Cheryl. And we'll see you on the next Coffee Talk next week.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers, everybody.